Before we continue the story, I just want to share something from my heart. Writing these stories has become more than just a hobby for me. It's something I truly enjoy and spend a lot of time creating for you all. Recently, I was looking through my channel analytics, and I noticed that many people who watch my videos don't usually leave a like or comment. I've never really been the type to ask for it, but the truth is, every like, comment, and subscribe helps these stories reach more people. It tells YouTube that this video is worth sharing, and that support genuinely helps this channel grow. So if you're enjoying the story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you take a second to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and it helps me continue bringing more stories like this to life. Now, let's continue the story. The email arrived at 6:14 in the morning while I was sitting in a dark nursery, trying not to fall apart from exhaustion. My daughter, Lily, had finally collapsed against my chest after screaming for nearly 2 straight hours. The apartment was silent except for the pale yellow lamp glowing beside the rocking chair, and I remember staring at the tiny rise and fall of her breathing like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. Then my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. I assumed it was another automated insurance update, or one of those fake corporate wellness emails companies send while quietly burning people alive behind the scenes. But then I saw the sender, Human Resources, and something inside me tightened instantly. Not anxiety, instinct, the kind that arrives before disaster fully reveals itself. I shifted Lily carefully against my shoulder and opened the message one-handed. Due to organizational restructuring and evolving business priorities, your position has been eliminated effective immediately. I read it once, then again, then a third time slower, like my brain simply refused to accept the words in front of me. Sleep deprivation can make reality feel slippery, hallucinatory. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought that was happening. Then I reached the second sentence. The real sentence, the one hidden beneath all the polished corporate phrasing like a knife wrapped in silk. At this time, your role is no longer required. No longer required. After 7 years. After 80-hour work weeks. After fixing disasters executives didn't even understand were happening until I handed them solutions polished neatly enough for boardroom applause. After working through contractions during a product launch because my manager said the timing was sensitive. The heat crawled up my neck so fast it scared me. My pulse started pounding in my ears louder than Lily's breathing. I called my boss immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. 10 minutes later, a text appeared. Can't talk right now. HR can answer your questions. That was it. 7 years reduced to 11 words from a man I had spent half a decade making look intelligent in front of investors. I sat there in stained sweatpants and a milk-soaked shirt, holding my 3-week-old daughter while the sun still hadn't risen, watching my career disappear through a glowing phone screen. And honestly, that wasn't even the worst part. 3 weeks later, I discovered they were preparing to launch my invention, the system architecture I had spent more than a year secretly building, under a shiny new initiative called Helix Dynamics. My work, my framework, my design, presented publicly with my name erased from every document attached to it. That was the moment something inside me changed completely. Until then, I'd been grieving, exhausted, numb. But the second I saw those slides, grief became clarity, because suddenly every strange interaction from the previous year rearranged itself into a pattern I could finally understand. The distancing, the exclusion, the careful removal of my visibility inside the company. None of it had been accidental. My name is Avery Callahan. I'm 34 years old. And this is the story of how a company fired me during maternity leave, tried to steal a $1 million invention, and accidentally invited me into the boardroom where they planned to profit from it. Before everything collapsed, I was lead systems engineer at a logistics technology company called Courtrace Solutions. We specialized in warehouse automation and predictive distribution systems, the kind of infrastructure nobody notices until it breaks and suddenly entire supply chains stop functioning. For years, I was one of the people quietly making sure nothing broke. I designed optimization systems that cut shipping delays across regional networks. I rebuilt failing infrastructure that saved the company millions annually. I solved technical emergencies senior executives barely understood existed until I handed them solutions simplified enough for presentation slides. But despite all of that, I was usually introduced the same way in meetings. Our technical girl. One senior director actually said that at a conference dinner while I sat 3 feet away from him. Everyone laughed politely. I smiled politely too, because women in corporate environments learn very quickly that reacting to disrespect somehow becomes the bigger offense. The shift started becoming obvious after I announced my pregnancy. Suddenly, I stopped getting invited to strategy calls. Technical questions were rerouted to junior engineers who later came privately to me for the real answers. One manager genuinely asked whether I planned to come back full-time emotionally after maternity leave. Emotionally. Like motherhood was some kind of cognitive impairment. I remember sitting 8 months pregnant in a glass conference room while my boss, Greg Holloway, presented an entire slide deck built from my work without mentioning my name once. Afterward, I approached him carefully and said, "You forgot to credit my team." Greg barely looked up from his phone. "You'll be out soon anyway," he said casually. "We're trying to establish continuity." At the time, I thought the comment was dismissive. Later, I realized it was a warning. I worked until 3 days before delivery. 3. My doctor told me repeatedly to slow down, but every time I tried, another emergency surfaced inside the company. Another technical collapse only I fully understood how to fix. And through all of that chaos, I kept quietly building something nobody at Courtrace fully knew existed yet. A predictive routing engine capable of adapting warehouse distribution systems in real time using behavioral shipment pattern modeling. The technical explanation is complicated. The business explanation is, it could save corporations staggering amounts of money automatically. More importantly, I knew the architecture was original. I knew it mattered. And deep down, I knew it belonged to me. The last week before maternity leave, Greg walked me toward the elevator after a product review meeting wearing that polished executive smile corporate men use when they want to sound supportive without actually offering anything meaningful. "Don't worry," he said warmly. "We'll manage without you." I thought he was being condescending. I had absolutely no idea he was already preparing to erase me completely. The first 2 weeks after Lily was born barely felt real. Feeding schedules, sleepless nights, emotional exhaustion so intense it physically hurt. I kept checking my work email compulsively because some part of me still believed I mattered there. At first, congratulations messages trickled in. Then silence. No transition updates. No project conversations. Nothing. Then came the company-wide restructuring announcement. Standard corporate language about efficiency and strategic realignment. Something about the timing immediately felt wrong. 3 days later, they terminated me. The HR call lasted less than 15 minutes. A woman I barely recognized explained in a rehearsed monotone that business priorities had evolved. I asked directly whether my maternity leave had influenced the decision. There was a pause, long enough to say everything she legally couldn't. "Absolutely not," she replied. I've since learned that in corporate language. Absolutely not delivered after a pause like that usually means lawyers helped craft the sentence carefully. When the call ended, I sat motionless for almost an hour. Not angry yet, just hollow. Then a message arrived from a former colleague named Nina. 4 words. "You should see this." Attached was a screenshot from an internal presentation. The second the image loaded, my chest tightened. Helix dynamics, my architecture, my framework, my formatting structures, my terminology, repackaged beneath Courtrace branding with my name removed from every slide. They had copied it so directly, it practically read like my own development notes. I called Nina immediately. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "They're pushing it aggressively," she whispered. "Greg's calling it the future of the company." My hands went ice cold. "Does everyone know I built it?" Silence. Then quietly, "They're describing it as collaborative development." Collaborative, that word hit harder than the termination itself, because I knew exactly what it was designed to do: blur ownership, bury accountability, make theft look procedural. Suddenly everything made sense. Fire me during leave, remove my system access, rebrand the architecture, launch publicly before I had time to react. I immediately tried logging into my company accounts. Locked out, everything scrubbed, archived folders gone, credentials revoked, years of work erased overnight. And weirdly, that was the exact moment panic disappeared, because panic transformed into something sharper. focus. Over the next several days, I gathered every external file I still had saved. Development drafts, time-stamped architecture diagrams, prototype notes, email backups. Then buried deep inside an external hard drive I almost ignored, I found the folder that changed everything. Patent drafts. My heart started hammering instantly. Months earlier, I'd quietly spoken with an intellectual property attorney named Daniel Reeves at a networking event. He told me one thing I never forgot. If something is truly original, he said, protect it before anyone realizes its value. So I had, quietly, without telling anyone at Courtrace. A provisional patent filing sat inside that folder with a timestamp dated 8 months before my termination. I called Daniel the next morning with shaking hands. After listening carefully to everything, he asked one question that completely changed the atmosphere of the conversation. Avery, did you formally file? Yes, I whispered. Provisional patent 8 months ago. Silence. Then, do you still have the confirmation? I opened the file immediately. There it was. Official submission receipt, time-stamped, legally verified. I read the filing number aloud. Daniel exhaled slowly. If this filing holds, he said carefully, they have a catastrophic problem. For the first time since that 6:14 a.m. email, something shifted emotionally inside me. Not hope exactly, something stronger. Leverage. Over the next 48 hours, I barely slept. Lily would cry at 2 in the morning, and after feeding her, I'd sit at the dining table building evidence files in the dark while the apartment stayed silent around me. The deeper we dug, the worse Courtrace looked. Emails from Greg explicitly praising my routing framework. Internal meeting summaries nomming me as lead architect. Development timelines. Version histories. The evidence wasn't hidden. It was everywhere. Which meant they either never checked ownership before trying to commercialize the technology, or they looked at an exhausted new mother and assumed she wouldn't fight back. That realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant the theft wasn't careless. It was calculated. Nina kept sending screenshots from inside the company, investor timelines, launch schedules, revenue projections attached to technology legally filed under my name. At one point, I saw Greg quoted internally calling Helix Dynamics the defining innovation of the next decade. I actually laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, because the same man who dismissed me while pregnant was now building his entire executive legacy on my work. Daniel, meanwhile, prepared formal legal action. One afternoon, he stopped midway through reviewing the patent details and looked directly at me. Avery, he said carefully, this isn't minor software optimization. I know, I replied quietly. This is commercially enormous. Hearing someone finally acknowledge the true value of my work affected me more deeply than I expected. Because for years at Courtrace, my intelligence had been minimized, redirected, or quietly claimed by louder people in nicer suits. Then Daniel called with an update that changed everything. They're accelerating the launch, he said. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're making massive financial commitments to technology they may not legally own. I stood by the apartment window holding Lily while the city moved normally outside. Cars passing, people walking dogs, entire lives continuing while mine balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Can they still launch? I asked. For now, Daniel said carefully. But if we intervene at the right moment, the fallout could destroy them. That was the exact moment I understood what Courtrace had actually gambled on. They bet I was too exhausted, too emotional, too overwhelmed by motherhood to become dangerous. They had 1 week left to be right. The timing Daniel chose was surgical. Courtrace had scheduled a major investor presentation to formally unveil Helix Dynamics publicly. Board members, executives, investors, financial commitments expected immediately afterward. Maximum exposure, maximum liability. That was when we would walk in. And somehow, unbelievably, someone inside executive administration had forgotten to remove my name from the stakeholder contact list, which meant I received an invitation to the final review session. Greg either hadn't noticed or genuinely didn't consider me a threat worth worrying about. The night before the meeting, I stood in my bedroom holding business clothes that barely fit my postpartum body while Lily slept nearby. Fear hit me hard that night. What if nobody believed me? What if they humiliated me publicly? What if the company buried this in litigation until I ran out of money fighting alone? I sat on the edge of the bed staring at Lily's crib until the fear slowly transformed into something colder. Then I remembered the email. No longer required. And something inside me finally stopped asking for permission to fight back. Courtrace headquarters looked exactly the same when I walked in the next morning. Same polished glass lobby, same artificial citrus smell in the ventilation, same giant digital wall displaying company values in sleek typography. Innovation, integrity, people first. Integrity, I almost laughed out loud. Security didn't stop me. My name was still on the approved visitor list. I walked through the building like I belonged there, because in ways they still didn't fully understand, I did. Daniel arrived separately carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to make anyone nervous. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No," I admitted. "Good," he replied calmly. "That means you understand the stakes." The boardroom buzzed with confidence when we entered. Investors drinking expensive coffee. Executives laughing casually. People carrying themselves with the relaxed certainty of individuals convinced they were about to make enormous amounts of money. And near the front stood Greg Holloway smiling comfortably like a man who thought he had already won. When he noticed me, surprise flashed across his face for maybe half a second. Then something almost insulting appeared instead. Amusement, like I was harmless. "Avery," he said casually, walking over. "Didn't expect you here." "I received the invitation," I replied evenly. "Nice to see you're doing okay," he said warmly, "after firing me during maternity leave, after stealing my work." "And you are?" he asked Daniel. "Her counsel," Daniel replied calmly. The shift in Greg's posture was tiny, but I saw it immediately. The presentation began 15 minutes later. Helix Dynamics filled the massive front display while executives praised the company's groundbreaking innovation pipeline. I sat beside Daniel watching, my frameworks appear on giant screens, while strangers applauded technology they believed belonged to Courtrace. At one point, an investor asked how long development had been underway. Greg answered smoothly. "Our engineering leadership team has been building this collaboratively for over a year." Collaboratively, there was that word again. The CEO stepped forward smiling broadly. "We're proud to unveil the future of predictive logistics." Applause filled the room. "Let's reveal our lead engineer's breakthrough." The live demonstration started loading. My system. My invention. My name nowhere. Daniel touched my arm gently. "Now," he whispered. I stood. At first, nobody reacted. Then Greg frowned slightly. "Before you continue," I said clearly, "there's something this room needs to understand." Silence swallowed the room instantly. Every face turned toward me. Greg forced a smile. "Avery, this probably isn't the appropriate time." "It's exactly the appropriate time," Daniel interrupted calmly. Then he opened the portfolio. And everything changed. "This technology," Daniel said with devastating calm, "does not legally belong to Courtrace Solutions." The silence afterward felt physical. The CEO blinked. "I'm sorry." Daniel placed documents onto the conference table one by one. "Helix Dynamics is built upon patented intellectual property legally registered under Avery Callahan prior to her termination." You could literally feel the energy leave the room. Greg went pale so fast it looked medical. One investor leaned forward sharply. "What exactly does that mean?" Daniel didn't even blink. "It means your company does not legally own the technology currently being presented to investors." Chaos detonated instantly. Questions exploded across the room, executives whispering frantically, investors demanding clarification. Greg started talking over everyone. "This is obviously a misunderstanding." "It's documented," Daniel interrupted calmly. Then he dismantled them piece by piece. Patent filings, version histories, internal emails, timeline documentation, messages from Greg himself, nomming me as lead architect. For months, I had questioned myself privately in the dark while feeding a newborn at 3 in the morning. Wondered if fighting back was irrational. wondered if maybe I should simply move on quietly. And now I was watching investors realize they had financially committed themselves to technology the company didn't own. Truth becomes very loud once money gets involved. One investor turned directly toward Greg. "You represented to us that Trace owned this." Greg opened his mouth, then closed it again. Not one person defended him. The CEO stared at Greg with visible disbelief. "When exactly did you become aware of this filing?" Greg stumbled through corporate nonsense about ownership ambiguity and collaborative development structures. He sounded terrified. Then Daniel delivered the sentence that ended the room completely. "My client is prepared to pursue immediate injunctions against any unauthorized commercial deployment." Silence. Then phones appeared. Lawyers got called. Investors started leaving. The presentation collapsed before another slide advanced. And across the room, Greg Holloway looked at me for the first time with something real in his eyes. Fear. Because he finally understood exactly what he had done. He had fired the inventor, then tried to sell her invention. And now the company was imploding publicly because of it. The fallout lasted months. Trace suspended the entire Helix rollout almost immediately, while emergency negotiations began behind closed doors. Investors reportedly threatened misrepresentation claims. Internal investigations launched. Greg disappeared from the company with almost surgical speed. First, his email stopped working. Then his internal company profile vanished. Then he quietly disappeared pending investigation without any public announcement whatsoever. Corporate loyalty evaporates instantly once liability enters the room. Daniel negotiated relentlessly. Meanwhile, word spread across the industry about the patent dispute, and suddenly multiple firms started approaching me privately about licensing opportunities. The same technology Trace had tried to erase me from became the single most valuable thing attached to my name. That emotional shift was difficult to process. 1 year earlier, I was fighting just to receive credit in meetings. Now executives suddenly spoke to me carefully, respectfully, legally cautiously. And honestly, that hurt too, because what I had always wanted wasn't fear, it wasn't leverage, it wasn't legal power. It was acknowledgement. The final settlement included compensation, licensing agreements, permanent inventor attribution, and official recognition across every commercial application connected to the system. But strangely, the money is what stayed with me most. What I remember most is the day the updated industry announcement went live. Inventor, Avery Callahan. 4 words. That was all. And I cried immediately. Right there at the dining table, with Lily sleeping beside me, while legal paperwork covered nearly every surface in the apartment. Because recognition becomes deeply emotional once someone has tried systematically to erase you from your own work. A few weeks later, I took Lily to a park near our apartment on a cold afternoon. My breath fogged in the air while she slept peacefully in her stroller, completely unaware of the war that had unfolded around her existence. And for the first time in nearly a year, I finally felt something unexpected. Not revenge. Not triumph. Peace. Because the worst thing Trace ever did wasn't firing me during maternity leave. It wasn't stealing my architecture. It was Greg's smug dismissiveness or the coworkers who stayed silent because they were scared. The worst thing they did was make me believe, even temporarily, that my value only existed when powerful people decided to acknowledge it. Once that belief broke, everything changed. I stopped shrinking myself in meetings. Stopped apologizing before expressing opinions. Stopped treating my intelligence like something that required permission to exist confidently. Because here's what I know now. Quiet people notice everything. We document carefully. We build things that last. And when someone finally pushes us far enough, when they fire us during maternity leave, steal our inventions, erase our names, and assume exhaustion makes us weak, we become very difficult to destroy. If you've ever been ignored, replaced, or watched someone else take credit for something you built with your own hands, share your story in the comments. These things happen in silence far more often than people admit, and silence is exactly what companies count on. Subscribe if you believe creators deserve permanent credit for what they build. Hit like button if this story reminded you that being underestimated is not the same thing as being powerless. And thank you for listening to mine.